I'm planning around 15-20 minutes to just learning about your journey and then jump
Yeah.
in 15 minutes with the Q&A with the audience.
Okay, y'all.
Okay, so let's start with a quick introduction of yourself.
Hey, y'all. I am Sarah Carlson. I used to be a lawyer on Wall Street. I defended big banks after the financial crisis, which seems like a very long time and ago and a weird thing to do. Um, to give you sort of an idea of why I left, I took an online assessment when I was there called the Values in Action. And it told me that my top five values, which are pretty reflective, I think, are love, spirituality, gratitude, curiosity, and forgiveness. What I learned is that is not a good fit for a corporate lawyer on Wall Street, as you can imagine. And I think that misalignment of my values and my strengths made me very unhappy, although I could be successful. So I left and I decided to start over and I moved to Haiti and I lived in a tent and I built schools and water filters to sort of all I knew is I wanted to help people. And I thought that was a really direct way to do that. Unfortunately, what I learned is you make $0 as a volunteer, and that I'm not actually designed to be a carpenter. I have other skills. So I decided I really wanted to learn how to leverage like what I'm really good at. If I could make it so far
Mhm.
to law and a top five law firm in the world, like what would happen if I actually did something that I had passion and interest and like flowed through me. And so I think there's a lot of folks like y'all who end up at really prestigious programs like Duke and elsewhere that sometimes some people were just struggling to find a job, right? And sometimes it's just like not, or you get out and you realize it's not a good fit. But I
Mhm.
find that the closer you align your work with who you are, one, the happier and more successful you are, and your job search also is more fruitful. But so after I came back from Haiti, I started working with students on their careers and
Mhm.
became very obsessed with like what success is and what it isn't and how do we define that. And then really my question is, okay, if we can identify successful people, would you all do me a favor and put in the chat anyone that you think of that's really successful? Anybody that who do you think? And it could be anybody. Elon Musk, that's one of the first people I would think too. Absolutely. I used to say Oprah. She's pretty successful. Anybody else? My question, and keep putting them in there, is what do those folks have in common? Like they're like game changers, right? I mean, so we don't have to be like changing the world or be famous, like to be successful, but like, that's certainly an avenue of success, no doubt about it. What do those folks have in common? And how do we give those skills, tools, or teach that to students to make them able to define and achieve their own version of success? So I've worked with law students, and then I worked with theology students, and then I created coursework specifically to teach the skills that I kept identifying that were critical to this process. And ultimately, and I taught at Duke, and I teach at Duke, and or taught. And what I found is, of all the career, can you raise your hand metaphorically if you've been to a few career workshops? Like you can go in your resume, you can go about learning about marketing yourself, you can go learn about networking, you can go learn about self-assessment. There's like 1,000 avenues that somebody might like want to teach you about. But really, I boil down everything I know. Everything I know, you can boil it down to five ideas or five principles that uh, I believe every successful person has. And all of those break into pieces that allow you to move forward in a really successful job search as well. So now I'm working on Career Transformation University. I'm publishing my first book and doing what I love. And I'll chat about sort of those things as we go. How's that for an intro?
Sure. That was awesome. Yeah. So how would we take it one by one? Like, how did you end up at law school? Like, going back to your journey,
Yeah,
that would be really helpful, particularly for the college students over here. So, like, what was undergrad for you, and how did you end up at Harvard Law School? Like, that was a transition, right?
it sure was. My mom was like, "Where is Harvard?" Like I'm not trained to go to Harvard. Like that's not where I come from. But so Before high school, I really wanted to be an actress. And but I also got like super good grades. I never got very good SATs, or they were like mediocre on the standardized tests. I imagine y'all know what those are. I was always mediocre at those, but I had, a 4.4 GPA and like was very good at school. And so I applied for and auditioned and got into some musical theater programs, but I was too afraid. I didn't want to be a really smart person who's a waitress who acts. Like it just didn't feel like a wise move. And so I just got afraid and didn't do that. And so I decided to focus on what I thought I was good at, which is school and writing and thinking. I'm good at words. And so I studied Spanish and political science. Really, I studied political science and then I took some Spanish classes and realized I love that actually. And so I did both. But ultimately, I decided then I like needed a replacement for being an actress. And so
Hmm.
law was that. And I just decided that was the direction I was going to go. Um, and I think a lot of people, is there anyone going to law school here or thinking about it? Raise your hand if so, or let me know. Um, Ultimately, what was I going to say? So I just kept going on that route. I went
Hmm.
to Tulane Law for my first year of law school, and I
Hmm.
did really, really well there. And one of the professors was like, "You're too smart to be here," which I was happy to be there. It was a top 50 school. And
Hmm.
she encouraged me to apply to transfer. And so I transferred to Harvard Law School. And it's so interesting too, because you're in a place where it's a good fit when you're really excited about what's happening there. And we would have like Supreme Court justices come and speak. And I just like, truth be told, when I look back, I didn't really care. Like, you know what I mean? I was interested and I understood, but like it's not my passion. But I did really well there as well. And so after that, like a lot of students, I was like, I'm gonna get the best job. Raise your
Hmm.
hand, or in metaphorically, raise your hand if that's your sort of plan. Is I'm gonna get the best grades, and then that will take me to the best job, and that will be like success. Anybody, is that your thought process? It's okay if it is. Most people's thought process now that I've worked with many, many, many students. Um, and I did. I got the best job. I worked for a judge as a clerk, which is a very prestigious thing to do. And then I worked on Wall Street. And as I said, it was not really, I don't actually like banks and I really am uncomfortable with conflict. So being a litigator it was a poor fit, although I could do it. And I find that a lot of high achievers like y'all, I know that you are high achievers, you can do almost anything because you're like, I will grind and I will be successful because that's what I've been trained to do, which is good. But you can burn out a lot faster when you're not using what I call like your dominant hand, which is your dominant hand are the things that you're designed to do. I'm designed to talk and create content and work with people. That comes 1,000% now. I cannot help it. I love it. I meet anyone. I want to talk about their career. I just want to empower people to do good things. Like I can't help it. And that's one sign that you're on a right track. That doesn't mean you have to abandon what you're doing to go find something like meaningful or go to Haiti. But we'll talk about how you can think about sort of the long term where you really want to be if you're really being honest, like in the long run. And then what do the short term steps look like to make it in that direction?
Okay. Now moving on, you transferred from law to going to volunteering in Haiti. So like many people have, stuck in those high paying, prestigious jobs. Like, how did you navigate that decision to leave Wall Street? And especially knowing in current times with financial security and health insurance, and how
Amen.
much
That
time
health
you,
insurance thing is a huge one, isn't it? It's like
yeah.
it's a beast. Um, First I was just so unhappy. I was getting headaches. I had literally had a headache every day and a migraine twice a week, and I was going to doctors all the time. I mean, it really was a you will experience like the ill fit. And Tay just asked a really good question. Um, how do we discover our dominant hand and like are we too late already? Well, Tejas, how old are you? 27. Yeah. So I was a lawyer on Wall Street. I had $180,000 in debt from Harvard. And then I decided at 30 I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore and I moved to a tent. So you got plenty, you're doing great. You're here asking the important questions. far before I was even asking them in terms of like where you are. It's never too late. I work with clients who are in their 40s and 50s who decide, and folks who are retiring, like, how do I actually use my talents in a way that would really serve me and the world? So it's a great question, and I'm going to write that down, Tasia. So one, I'm going to give you one simple trick, just because you asked the question. Uh, what do you like doing? So with what you do at school or in your internships, what do you enjoy doing? And what do you not enjoy doing? And be really honest about that. I know that sounds really ridiculous and simple, but like this is literally what I did. Um, so for me, I don't like researching and writing all day long. I really enjoy writing. I do not enjoy researching and writing like a slave at a computer for 12 hours a day in a conflictual situation. So, that's the first thing. So if you're not, I don't know where you are in your track, but if you do that, you start being honest with yourself. You're like, okay, so when I came back from Haiti, and this is one of the points, okay, now, now I'm worse. I'm an unemployed lawyer at 31 with who's broke with huge debt, and I don't want to be a lawyer. All I know is that. Okay. So you're doing great. You're here. You're in it. You're likely not as far off as I was with what I enjoyed doing. Okay. So the first thing that you want to, there's two things. We're getting into self-direction, which is one of those five things I was talking about. So the first thing you do, it's going to sound ridiculous. You bullet a list of what you know you want or need out of your next position. So that sounds, and again, this is not a wish list that we pray that God will like deliver to us. This is the things that we will assess opportunities against. I find like looking at jobs like out in the ether and then just doing a pro cons list, it gets really fuzzy because you're like, well, maybe that has more pros than the other, but this pro might be worth more than the other pro. It's actually much more value. That doesn't mean pro cons list doesn't have their value. But in this situation, it's much easier to assess how does this job fit into what I know that I need. And the only requirement is that you're honest and you name what you know. So when I was 31. I had the worst haircut of my life. I'm living with my in-laws in Johnson City, totally depressed and just clueless. And I read a book that told me two things. One, identify what you want and need. So my list of what I knew I needed. I needed to make $60,000 to survive with my debt. I wanted to be in Atlanta if I had it my way. I knew I wanted to work with people and I wanted it to be positive. Like I could not, as a lawyer, I worked with people, but like it was all very negative and past looking. I wanted to move something forward, not just fix backwards stuff. And five, I probably didn't want to practice law. So those were literally my five bullets around which I navigated my entire career. So when you're thinking about this is not a perfect list. It's literally just, I knew that for sure. Those are the things I knew for sure. Does that make sense? Okay. At the same time, I read this book that's like, oh, think about your North Star and what would you do if you could do anything? And I was like, that just sounds freaking ridiculous. I'm an unemployed lawyer with a bad haircut and no money. But I was like, well, this lady says you can do it. So at that point, my vision and my future, and I'm always pointing back because I like to think about like my vision for my future is like that wall. It's a post-it note on that wall. And my career and success is not my vision. My goal was to be Oprah. If I could be anything, I would be Oprah, was what I said. So I did not know how you go from unemployed lawyer with five things that I knew I wanted to Oprah. But what I did not do was like throw that away and was like, nah, that's impossible. I don't know how to write. I didn't do that. I was just like, you know what? I'll just hold that. And you have to be brave enough to claim the direction that you want to go. So what we're talking about is essentially like your career is a staircase. We have to name what this next step might look like if we have it already. You also have to name where you're going because a lot of times we make assumptions about what's required to get here, and that's not actually true. But you want to make sure your steps are leading to the place that you want. So the two main things are bullets, literally those words. And then when you're ready, you don't have to be ready to do this yet. There's plenty, you can do a vision board of your future. There's 1,000 ways to claim a vision for your future. My favorite is writing 10 dreams of things you'd like to experience, accomplish, be, do, or have in your lifetime. So anything that doesn't have to all be work. Like what you want is like when I die, if I've accomplished any of these, I'll feel great. Or like, if I have it my way. So one of the things I want to do is I want to speak around the world. I want to write a book that a million people read. I want to be the lead singer of a band. I don't know when or where that's going to happen in my professional path, but it's on my list. I also want to learn how to live a life that everyone on the planet could live. Like, how do I minimize my lifestyle such that it's ethical and moral? I don't, I'm 1,000 miles from that. I have you know what I mean? But I'm claiming, like, what would I do if I could do anything? And my goal is to walk in that direction. And so I didn't know how those 5 ideas like met there. But ultimately what happened was I got a job as a career advisor or a career coach at a law school because that met my needs. It was in Atlanta. I made 60K. I got to work with students. It was very positive, and I didn't have to practice law. And that's another thing that's a trick here is notice that my transition was adjacent. I didn't go from lawyer to career coach for, engineers at that point. That was later. What I did was I leveraged what I do have. So sometimes, and a great tool for this, if anyone's listening, if you just write those 5 things and then you ask ChatGPT, what positions might allow me to do this and leverage my degree in why? Does that make sense? So, Tejas, you want to talk more about what you're thinking about these days? No pressure. Oh, there you
Y- Yeah, hi. So I mean, just thinking on top of my head, just few things like I have to repay my education loan, roam the world, most probably like the western part of Europe, get married, and that's it. I could think of these 6 as of now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good. I mean, one, that's awesome. Also, I'll give you a tip, y'all. I had to drink a lot of wine and go to a mountaintop in order to like allow myself to like dream and like choose what I really would want. If that voice in my head wasn't like, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. You're not good enough for that. Like, that voice is very loud, which is step 4 of the 5 principles is how do I learn to believe I'm worthy and capable? It's really difficult to convince someone that you're worthy and capable of something if you don't believe it yourself. So that's part of the work of like doing what I do and teaching what I teach, which is becoming an effective advocate for yourself. So first of all, that's perfect for your long-term vision and planning. What I want you to be thinking about is in this next job, it sounds like you want to calculate how much do you need to make. So it's not loans are a big deal for you. They're a big deal for me. Um, Two, for my practical purposes, I still deferred and did a lot of things with my student loans, such that it took a very, very long time to pay them. And then I got them forgiven through student loan programs, a lot of it after paying for 15 years, because ended up what I was doing was that. So you want to write down what do I need to make? And the way that I think about that pay is like, think about like my ideal pay. You want to write it in a spectrum. My ideal pay is like, I really think I should be making 120 out of grad school. Okay, great. Then I want you to like literally consider your expenses, where you might want to live, and attempt to come up with like the lowest number that you could make and still survive and feel like you're okay if it were the perfect job in the world. And that's not what we're going for. And then there might be a middle ground. The idea is you've named like this is the pay range that I must meet. And geographically, if you know where that is, great. If you don't know where that is, in terms of a job search that's effective, you want to choose 1, 2, or 3 cities or areas. You don't want to have more than that. Like a worldwide job search is very difficult. A nationwide job search is very difficult. And that doesn't mean you have to like limit yourself. So, for example, if you're thinking, I want maybe New York City, maybe somewhere in California, but I'm really open to anything. That's fine. But when you name the place where you want to be geographically, it allows you to target, which is much easier. Like when you have to do a job search in like 15 cities, it can get really unwieldy. Um, and you can also stay open to what if you see a job, that doesn't mean you don't apply to jobs that are really amazing in other places, but in terms of where you put your energy, it should be in the place that you've named. And the same idea. So once you've named those 5, or doesn't have to be 5, whatever you know about what you need in your next step, positive people, whatever, you can use AI, which is ChatGPT is an excellent, or whatever tool, is an excellent tool for that brainstorming process and connecting you to things you don't know exist yet. What you want to do is, okay, it might give you a huge list of stuff, et cetera. 1, go in a conversation with it, but 2, then you want to limit. So product management could be an avenue for you, and maybe you're having success or not. And the question would be, how do I, 1, reorient my materials or make a job search more effective in that direction? But also, what are other avenues? And I call them avenues because you don't really have to even know what you're talking about. If it meets what you know you need out of your next step, then it's worth writing down and doing some exploration. So, for example, it could be product management. I usually tell people to do the same thing with money, the same thing that I encourage you with the dollars, do with your interests. So identify 1, 2, or 3 avenues, and that could be a setting. You're like startup, product management, that's why I choose avenues, because sometimes it's a setting, sometimes it's a role, sometimes it's a field, and that's okay. Any of that. I've had clients who are like, I work in communications, but I just really want to work in a museum. Okay, great. Don't just shut that down because you don't know anything about museums at this point. That's an avenue. Does that make sense? And you don't want to have more than 3 because, again, it's unwieldy to explore so much. That said, if you go forward and you realize, okay, I'm not having any traction with product management, or I talked to them and that sounds terrible. Great. Cross it off your list and we can keep going. But the idea is to name what you know and then identify roles that will help you, that would allow you to have what you want that you know. And then again, we'll start to talk about the next step, which is to start to learn. And I have some really cool tricks for that as well, for how do I articulate to something, like if they're not anticipating my resume necessarily, how do I make my resume more attractive? Like if you chose to go out of the MEM program and go into something that was different than you expect, like how do we articulate that you're a good fit, right? Thoughts, questions, concerns? I wish we could get into it with some individual because we could help sort it out. So if anybody wants to ask a specific question.
Feel free to type on the chat if you guys want.
Oh, is there more chat?
No, I'm asking them to type.
Oh, yeah, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Yeah.
And while you're thinking about that, here's like for the job search itself, something that most people ignore. Okay, so let me back up and I'm going to show you a slide and then I'll talk about where we're at. Just because I want to give context. I just threw a lot at you, which I tend to do. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so what is success? Whoop, whoop. That's not where we're at. Okay. This is just something, this is Ikigai, which is a Japanese concept for when you're thinking about your long-term vision, which is 10 dreams. That's one way to do it. There's plenty of ways, but they would define success as the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you can make money doing, and what the world needs. That doesn't mean you need to go be a public servant, but like eventually you'll find your work less meaningful. Basically, there's so much Japanese like intense literature. This is just a very tiny boiling down of a really important concept. But if you're really thinking about your long-term vision, or like, let me say this, I went as a lawyer where I was good at it and I made good money. I did not love it and the world did not likely need it. And then I went to Haiti and I loved doing that. I loved serving in that way. And in theory, the world needed that. However, I made $0 and I'm not designed to be a carpenter. So this is a good way to evaluate if your next step makes sense. So then when I named what I knew I needed, positive people, 60,000, Atlanta, and I became a career coach and then ultimately a professor, that met all of my qualifications. I love doing it. I was good at doing it. I earned decent money, and I think the world does need that. And then you leverage from there. I wasn't satisfied. Like, I have much bigger dreams than working as a career advisor or career coach, right? At that time. But that's a really good way to start to assess whether your next step might meet your things. Okay, that's not what I was actually getting. Okay. These are the 5 things that a really successful person knows. They're effective self-advocates, which means they know who they are and they know how to leverage their talent in the world on purpose. And so an effective self-advocate knows who they are, which means you're self-aware. And I think that was what Tejas was asking, like, how do I identify what I'm actually good at? Strengths Finder, I know you have access to that through Duke. Those are always really floofy, but you can put that into ChatGPT. Like, say, here's my resume. Here's the Strengths Finder says I have. Here's things I know that I need. What jobs in the world might allow me to use this and leverage what I have? So that's the second point, is self-direction. Where are we going? We're self-aware and we're self-directed. You have to define your own version of success. And the third point we're just about to get to is self-articulation. How do you speak about yourself effectively to your audience, like a lawyer does for a client? Fourth is that idea, am I worthy and capable, which is self-belief. And then fifth is embodying your vision, like taking action on your vision. So those are just the 5, in case anybody's wondering. And my book on the 5 principles of effective self-advocacy will be out this summer. Okay, so this is self-direction. Like I said, what's your next step? Where's it leading you? But this is really what I want to get to, and the secret of like a job search. Let me move this up. I love this meme because people are terrified of that question. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Okay. Okay. So in the job, again, once you've identified a few avenues, right? Then you want to ask and identify some roles. So again, ask ChatGPT literally, what jobs might I consider, right? Okay, so say you found like a job title or 2 job titles that you want to look at. Whoop, I'm gonna go back. I'm actually gonna stop sharing. I just wanted to use the PowerPoint that I made. Now I have to stop sharing. Okay, so, all right. Once you found a job description, and my guess is even for a product management job, which you're actively pursuing as an example, you want to make sure that you're speaking directly to the audience's priorities. And again, we're going to use a magical tool, which didn't used to exist. I used to have to teach people how to identify these priorities on their own. What you want to do is you can just take the job description, copy and paste it, put it in ChatGPT, and say, what are the top 5 things this employer wants from an ideal candidate? You can almost always boil any job posting into 5 ideas or fewer. Sometimes there might be 6, but it's rare. Okay. And then you want to adapt your materials to those 5 things. Everything you're doing should attempt to articulate that you have what they want. And a way to go about that is then you take your resume, copy and paste, and then you can ask ChatGPT just to align it for that job posting, but I find it more effective to align it with those top 5 items. How do I emphasize these top 5 things in this resume? And ask ChatGPT how to help you do that. I have a whole bunch of techniques on my own, etc. Like, again, because I was teaching this far before we had ChatGPT. But it's not about being great on your own or like having the best grades or anything like that. Let me ask you this. You've all heard it. Many of you have heard it in business school, marketing, whatever. What's the most important thing in it to be an effective marketer? Harshit, I can see his mind brewing. No, you don't have to answer. I was just asking you. It's to target your message. So if you were hiring, if I had like a rare form of cancer and I have the opportunity to hire a great cancer specialist, and then I have the opportunity to hire a doctor who specializes in my specific form of cancer, I will always choose that. So there's 2 things you're going for. Is you want to be super competent and like high quality, like you want to be you want the best surgeon, but even better than that is someone who does exactly what you want them to do. And that's, I mean, it's just like marketing, and it's the hardest freaking thing to do. Okay, now that I've said all that, you don't need a new resume for every job. You need a new resume for every category, right? So that's why you don't want to have too many opportunities. So for example, you could do product management in New York City is one of your resumes. And then your next one is like startups in the tech industry that relate to one of your passions. That's a different resume. And you can identify what those resumes look like using ChatGPT and then applying those like principles within your materials. And then the final, well, there's plenty of steps. Another way to like make sure I'm not full of crap and that this is working is you obviously, as everyone tells you, you want to talk to somebody who's doing it. What do you love about it? What do you hate about it? All that jazz. But also, these are some of the things that I've identified that it seems like are really important in this role. What am I missing? Is my resume reflective of what you would want to see if you're lucky enough to talk to somebody who's willing to look at your resume? And so those are a few of the pointers. And it's interesting that your questions were sort of directly aligned with the two main principles I was getting at, which is self-direction. And it sounds so silly and like ridiculous to start your job search with a list of what you really need. But it's like any other workshop you'll take on starting your business or marketing. It's the same thing. Like you have to figure out what is it I really want and need, and then move from there. And that doesn't mean you're going to get 100% of what you need out of your next job. You don't need that. You don't need 100% satisfaction in a job for it to be a really wonderful opportunity. And then once you're in it, the goal is, okay, what would be my next step that might lead me closer to that? And the way that you do that is, what do I love about where I am? And what do I hate about it? So when I was a career advisor and then like started becoming an adjunct professor teaching self-advocacy, I love working with students. I love teaching. I hate spreadsheets. I love presenting. I don't like the fact that I'm stuck in a really small school. So I figured out what my next step might look like from there.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think we are almost on time now.
Yes, yes. I'm going to put my email in the chat if
So,
anybody wants to reach out. I'm happy to help, and I hope that some of this was helpful and there was some pragmatic